Welcome back to the Cineposium podcast. I'm Martin Ibarra Ramos.
And I'm Alex Apicella.
Thank you all for joining us again for this week's episode. In case you missed our last episode, we discussed the 2000 X-Men film with our weekly curator, Mike Mazzacane, in honor of its 20th anniversary. And it was a really fun and informative conversation, so please check that one out if you haven't had the chance yet. And we have another great show for you today. So Alex, why don't you let them know how the show works?
Here's how the show works. So every week we're going to be inviting members or collaborators of Cineposium to curate a film for a remote viewing. Then we're going to have a conversation about the film. New episodes are going to be published every Thursday with various members from Cineposium coming on to discuss the films with our weekly curators. This week's curator is Kylie Harris. Welcome back to the show. I think we had managed to program one of your slots last season, but you weren't able to come on. And then we also have Mike Mazzacane back on the show as well, returning from his episode about X-Men to talk about Cam. Tell us about Cam, Kylie.
Yeah, of course. Super happy to be here with all of you. So I picked Cam this week. And so it's a horror and psychological thriller written by Issa Mazet and directed by Daniel Goldhaber about Alice, played by Madeline Brewer, that makes a living webcamming under the name Lola. She's making steady progress, climbing the ranks, carefully planning and mapping out each day's show in her room, the most shocking of which included a faked suicide where she pretended to slit her own throat. The horror aspect of the film is revealed when a copy of herself hacks her account, locking her out, and continues to cam with her name and face. It starts to affect not only her life camming, yet while her rank improves, she no longer has control over her shows or access to her profits. But it also affects her life outside of camming. Her job is outed without her consent at her brother's birthday party. Her stalker is given false confidence. Her best paying and most influential fan assaults her after he meets her in person and sees that she's simultaneously doing a show online and gets very suspicious. And her brother's identity is also exposed by her doppelganger. But Alice pursues a solution to this problem with much the same zeal that she does with her cam work, and she's able to challenge her copy to a duel to see who is the best Lola. After smashing up her own face, which a copy Lola isn't able to replicate, she's able to win back her account information and ultimately delete the account and the copy Lola with it. And at the end, we see her mom doing her makeup and covering up her sort of crooked nose, telling her that she's going to start talking about starting another account. And the film closes on a new room with Alice playing a brand new persona. And I'm particularly interested in this film because of its depiction of sex work, specifically in the form of camming. There haven't been that many films that really dive into camming specifically. There have been a few, but I felt like this one was interesting in different ways as well. So the writer, Issa Mazet, is herself a former cam girl, and this piece was like a really deliberate attempt to change the narrative around sex work and camming. And so I have some, things to talk about with all of you, but I just am really curious just to see, your perspective on the film, what you thought about. Like, it doesn't have to be about sort of my particular interest, but just in hearing what you all thought.
Sure, I'll go first. So I did watch the film the year it came out. I think it was 2018. And I was a little late to it, but I did watch it then, and I haven't seen it since then. So I, as I usually do to prepare for episodes, I watched it this morning before we recorded. And I think as is usually the case for me, I think I got a lot more from it in my rewatch, or just a lot more that I hadn't in the first time. And I want to agree. I think the most interesting thing to me is, I will say also I'm interested in films that are sort of tech horror, and I think that this is a really interesting installment into that sort of subgenre of horror, because I think although there is this element of tech horror and how it's applied to sort of POVs that we get through camera work, there's a lot more going on than just that sort of experiential quality to the tech aspect. And so I think that that's something that's really necessary for that subgenre to keep, to survive. And so I think it does a really great job of that. Maybe we can talk more about that later. But I'm also I'm also really interested in how this depicts sex work. Because I think, and I don't want to step too much on your toes, so I'll just say I think it's interesting that this isn't necessarily about leaving sex work, and so I think that that's really fascinating.
Exactly. I feel like that's so huge. I just watched a documentary a couple weeks ago for the Adult Film History Special Interest Group. There's a lot of acronyms here, of SCMS, which is the Society for Cinema and Media Studies. Had this showing where we watched horrors on film and then discussed with the director, Juliana Piccillo, and it was really interesting because that is one of the most common tropes in these films about sex work, is that there's always one that the person, that whoever is in the field isn't really seen positively or as legitimate unless they got into it not of their own free will, that they didn't choose this work, and that they're essentially trying to get out of it, that they're always trying to leave sex work and get out of it, and that it's a temporary thing, it's just for survival. And so I thought that this was huge, that she chose this herself, and that even despite the horror and what happens to her during this time, she still stays in it, and that she's really passionate about the work that she does.
Yeah, I really respected that sort of non-judgmental approach to it, and I think it's really important. But yeah, Alex, Mike, your guys' reactions to watching the film?
Okay. Well, I forgot how much of it was an unspoken deepfake movie, because that was a thing that was came out about a year before this movie came out. But it's that cross with Student von Prague, this 1913/1926 German silent film about doppelgangers that I found really interesting, and also the use of the screen as this kind of connective but also really isolating space, and how that is reinforced in the staging and all that.
Yeah, I had picked up the film a little bit later after it had come out originally, because at the time I was pretty much exclusively following Blumhouse releases, and that's how I was trying to I don't know, center my horror research was initially around some of the Blumhouse films. And I'd seen a trailer for it when it had come out, and I was concerned. I was worried because so many films like this, Martin and Kylie said, they tend to be a little bit swerfy. It's sex worker exclusionary. Yeah, and so I was worried that that's what it was going to be, and I hadn't done much much looking into the film initially, to kind of inform myself that it wasn't that. And then one of my friends who is a sex worker, and she does cam, had seen the film, and she was you should totally actually watch this. It's not anti-sex worker in the slightest. It's actually very positive, and has a lot of really intense moments of social commentary on what it's like to try to exist in the world as a sex worker. One of the things that she was really really interested in pointing at was the way in which when Lola slash Alice tries to go to get help, she's harassed about it, which is paralleling to the way that police very notoriously treat sex workers. And so I was able to watch this movie, and I was wow, this reads to all the experiences that I see on online forums, and my friends talking about that this is stuff that they really struggle with, and the notion of the doppelganger in particular being a metaphor extendedly for online piracy and the reproduction of content without their approval. And it's phenomenal film that was a lot more involved and a lot deeper than what I had initially thought it was going to be, when the kind of selling point of it was sex worker horror. So yeah, I enjoy Cam a lot.
Yeah, and I had not picked up on that piracy sort of metaphor either until I read an interview with Issa Mazet, and as soon as I read that, I was like, oh my god, that is perfect. It is literally perfect. I think she says that, like she herself had ended up seeing footage of her, her video in her room up on Pornhub, and saw like how it was described as well, like by whoever pirated it, and remembered that it was just like this awful situation because she had like no control over what was there, and how it was framed or cut or anything, and obviously completely separated from like being able to reap any of the profits of like her own content. And so I thought, yeah, like this connection between like, while this is obviously different because it's, like Lola's doing things, or this copy of Lola's doing things that, she never did, it's still, she still has no control over like that face that's up.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of themes that I feel like we could talk about in terms of things like identity theft. I feel like there's a lot of different ways in which horror taps into this, which are really interesting. But in focusing in on the the fact that this is a film about a sex worker, one thing that I thought was interesting in how they're being depicted is, or how their experience is being depicted is, I found it really interesting, the relationship with the mother. I forget the mother's name, but from the moment that the reveal happens at the birthday party, and her response, I think it was performed really well, but also written really interestingly. And I wonder your guys' thoughts on that, because to me, I wasn't quite sure I didn't really remember that moment. And then, how things happen in the end sort of, I guess, helped me understand her reaction at that moment. And so it's kind of interesting to me because it feels like she's not totally judgmental of it. She's just like kind of taken aback, like kind of surprised.
Was it her reaction at the birthday party?
Yeah. And then she just goes right into like, we're gonna go sing happy birthday. It's not really like, I'm gonna reprimand you, I'm gonna embarrass you further or anything like that. Like it's really just, I need to like take this in, but we need to sing happy birthday right now. You know what I mean? And so I found that like a sort of delicate approach to, her being outed as a sex worker in front of her mother and I guess others as well. But
yeah, I hadn't thought of that actually. I like your perspective on it. That was one part that I didn't love of this film, just because I felt like, I don't know, that's such a trope that everybody looks down on sex workers, and that that you're always worried about when's the shoe gonna drop, when is everyone gonna find out, but I mean that is people's experience, so it makes sense that it's there. I do hope that there are films in the future made that have instances where like everyone approves and like it's not a big deal, especially because it's so common. Camming's really common, especially right now, even more so. I think there's like a huge influx of people to camming sites with the pandemic because that's a way you can be socially distanced.
Absolutely. And I think that one scene where I think it was I forget who was clicking through different channels, on the particular site, but I felt like that lasted a while, and we saw a lot of different cam girls there, and I feel like that did kind of bring up that notion of like it is very common, and
it's I loved that how they depicted that too, and I didn't really think about that until I started reading reviews of this piece. But I think that was really interesting that they definitely made an effort, in seeing interviews with Daniel Goldhaber and Issa Mazet, they made an effort to have the sex workers, like the footage that you were mentioning where they show through the different rooms with the different people, that they wanted like people with different body types, they wanted people with different race and ethnicity, they wanted different just sort of like sexualities, like different fetishes and kinks and desires and things like that. And I thought that was really great. They did it really...
Oh, absolutely. That's so true. And I actually I don't know that I thought about that, but there is that sense of diversity as well, and not just quantity. That's interesting.
And I think they mentioned also having Baby Girl, like the number one cammer, being a black woman, because there's often, obviously issues with race in porn, like huge issues. But I thought they wanted to make an effort into making it more diverse in terms of who they're showing on this and who's succeeding too. And also I think they also wanted to, they mentioned too, like having, they were showed different settings too in there, so like different degrees of professionalism or different degrees of use of setting and staging and things like that. Like there's sort of more sort of amateur and levels of experience, and then there's like people who really, you know, like spend a lot of money to make everything look a certain way. So I thought that was really interesting too, that they talk about that. And one thing too that that's I think was obviously like really important for her was to talk about how this was a job for her. And so like they, you know, they just show a lot of the sort of more mundane things, like the planning out of the calendar of the like different days that she was going to work and different days that she was going to do these different things in her room. And then like going and buying the supplies for it, and you know, collaborating with others to sort of boost interest. And like, you know, she was looking at statistics and things about, you know, who is coming to the room and who's watching, and you know, who's more likely to actually tip, whereas, you know, trying to get rid of the people who don't. Yeah, I thought that was great.
Agreed. Yeah, and you mentioned the scene when the cops came, and that was another thing that kind of stood out to me. Is I was trying to read the one cop's response, who stays inside when the other one gets the call, and I'm not totally sure that I get it still, but so I'm wondering if maybe you want to talk about that, like, because it kind of felt to me like he was almost interested in her.
Yeah, I think
that. But at the same time was judging her, is how I sort of interpreted it.
That's how I interpreted it too. Yeah, that scene was really creepy. And that was particularly interesting because, like, while this whole film was fictionalized, Issa Mazet says that scene, like, had nothing fictional. That was all things that she herself has heard from police, or things that her friends have, or that she's read directly that other sex workers have heard said. So that was, like, incredible. But yeah, I sort of interpreted it as, I at first thought he was trying to like entrap her, that he was trying to get her to admit to prostitution, but then it sort of turned into this creepy hitting on her, which was also creepy.
So I mean, I guess that speaks to a little bit of like maybe the sense of like pleasure that's being experienced, this sense of like, I mean, I don't know, you know, again, there's an element of violence or self-inflicted violence to appease cravings of certain people that are, you know, there on her particular cam channel, you know, tipping her to continue so they have these sense of, and so maybe there's something there that that's how I'm interpreting it. Like,
I liked that scene too in the beginning where, you know, the scene where she's, so it, like, it initially seems really creepy that there's like this anonymous person in her room sort of instigating her to do these violent acts upon herself, but then I like how they turn it, because you know, she's manufactured the whole thing, like she's this one almost stalker fan, you know, is willing to do whatever, and so does this. I really liked that, because I do. Obviously, like, this is something also that was talked about in the Whores on Film documentary, is that there's often this trope of violence against sex workers. Like, just, it's consistent. It's so pervasive. And so I do find that problematic. I didn't find that scene. I enjoyed that scene. And even the violence sort of at the end is self-inflicted too, where she's, you know, smashing her own face to sort of beat the other Lola. So I do think that was good. I think it does seem like they were trying to like walk that line while not, you know, kind of catering to that stereotype, I guess.
But yeah, I think, yeah, I guess so. That's with the cop. I think it was interesting that it almost felt like he was into the fact that she was doing something that's like in his world illegal, or you know.
Yeah,
so
or taboo.
there's a lot to read there that I was kind of like, wow, this is interesting and really layered.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah, and I think that that's like a little bit of like like a I don't know how like widespread this knowledge is, so I'm gonna like mansplain it for a minute. So like in a lot of US states it is actually completely legal for an undercover cop to have sex with a sex worker prior to arresting her. So like I felt like that was what that scene was kind of trying to address a little bit, was like this is police corruption, this is creepy, this is happening to a lot of sex workers. Like it like, yeah, like there's like a lot of like just nastiness. Like there's actually, I'm pretty sure, like a whole Wikipedia page just dedicated to like police abuse of sex workers in the United States very specifically, because like there's not a lot of like protection legislation just in general that like is meant to like offset the power imbalance between police officers and sex workers, just like there isn't a lot of legislation to undermine the power imbalance between police officers and pretty much anyone in the United States. So yeah, like I think the film is like really good at like very like very pointedly kind of like going to task on some of these things that are just like realities that like as a sex worker like you'd be like very invested in like understanding and knowing and like realizing that like it's an issue, but it's just like totally something that like if you're not a part of that community, then like you'll totally miss it, kind of thing.
Yeah, I think definitely the whole movie was to sort of get people to empathize with sex workers. At least that's what Issa Mazet says. But I think, and that's interesting too, that like, even though, so, her position as like a sex worker, she is vulnerable in that she can't go to the authorities, and she can't go to, she tried to go to IT to get them to help getting her account back, and they did nothing to help her. But she was able to rely, like, one, she could turn to like her community too of sex work, like of the other cam girls, which I liked, and also that she also was able to sort of solve it herself, which I thought was great to sort of highlight the agency, her own agency, being able to get out of this situation. And I guess, it's part of the fact that it's like a horror film, so of course there's going to be this situation, but I would love in future to see other movies too where, they're not sort of, people aren't necessarily vulnerable because of what they do. But that is also the society in which we live, so I understand.
Yeah, I think that like it would be super interesting to see if like if this film was made outside of a US context. Like I'm thinking like very specifically like in the Netherlands, where sex work is legalized and decriminalized. At least like in an official policy. That doesn't mean there's not discrimination against sex workers, but at least like on a legal scale, it is considered to be a taxable income. It'd be very interesting to see, because like I don't know like how international camming is treated differently. I only know like the US context for camming, and then separately like a few international contexts for like in-person sex work. But like, yeah, like I think it'd be super fascinating to see like if this experience that like is being mapped out in this film can resonate with international communities of sex workers as well. And if it does, like what does that say about like global society at large in terms of how society is treating people that people are paying for their services. Like, and it's a business, and like you either pay money to the business or you don't frequent the business. Like yeah, so I don't know, it's very interesting to me.
That kind of like how the film really emphasized the capitalist element of it. What I found, like, at first I was like, oh, they're really overdoing it, but then I just thought about Twitch streamers nowadays and how like that parallels. But like I kind of want to talk about the end and like how it kind of plays with the idea of identity in the movie, because like she produces a fake driver's license at the end, and like part of like through this movie I was like, we're gonna have some sort of gonna just want to like throw Freud at in like some symbiosis and whatnot, and like the fake her was gonna turn out to be some weird techno babble, and we'd have some cyberpunk fusion thing at the end. But like the idea that she's gonna keep doing this, and like it both reinforces how like she is resourceful and really good at it, because like she got a fake ID that tricked the system, but also like okay, I don't want to. I'm not talking down on it, but like she's like, I'll just keep making another one and keep doing it. If it happens again, I'm like, on one hand, I'm like, that's good, but also like, I don't know. I feel like maybe she's not trapped in that. Not trapped. That's not the right word, but like, it's what she wants to do. But like, why is she using the same site? Is what I'm saying. Go to a different site, preferably with better web design.
Yeah, and there's so many sites nowadays too.
Yeah, it's I like that you brought up Twitch as a platform, as well as being kind of like a comparable kind of system to like the website that she uses to cam, because like yeah, it does sometimes feel a little bit like that. And then Twitch is like really like they're really big on their like terms of use and service, and are trying very hard to cut down on like just really crack down on like sex work, and very specifically on their platform, because smaller accounts can get away with it because their algorithms aren't really fashioned to like detect content on platforms that contain, you know, less than 100 viewers regularly. So like yeah, people will go on Twitch, they'll make their accounts, they'll do their sex work once they reach a certain cap on the viewership that would get them caught by Twitch's algorithms. They then go and they make a new account under a similar but not the same identity, and keep working like the back streams of Twitch that way. But then also like there's OnlyFans, and so for like those larger Twitch streamers slash influencers who have decided that instead of, you know, deleting the account and then making a new one once the Twitch algorithm picks up, that they'll foster their community on Twitch, get high viewership, and then move their viewership onto a new platform after they've already cultivated that community. And so like OnlyFans then becomes like, you get donations for playing the game and being pretty on Twitch, and then you send them to your OnlyFans account where you can actually do sex work without having to worry about the Twitch algorithms, and without having to restart back at like that 0 viewership count. So it is a very fascinating system.
It is, yeah. I was reading an article in XBiz, one of the porn trade journals, and they were talking, one of the articles was, I think it was about NSFW, but also safe for work. So a lot of porn stars are actually finding, or sort of highlighting their safe for work content on their different social media accounts. One, you know, because some social media accounts, like you can't have anything pornographic or sexual at all, but also as a way to just get new audiences and get new people. And so they're just sort of doing all these different really interesting things on all these different platforms to build their own brand and business. So I think that's all really fascinating. I need to do a lot more research on some of these other platforms too.
Yeah, I'd be interested to know, so like with like the Twitch OnlyFans connection in particular, like whether or not like this additional element of like safe for work content like manages to I don't know, like not like change or alter, but like transform the perspective of the people who are viewing the not safe for work content. Because like the Twitch content, like that's always going to be very humanizing. Like that's, you know, a person playing a video game, having fun in like a very non-sexual way, that like, you know, you can sit there and be like, wow, like this we could be friends, like I play this video game, you play this video game, we can do that. And then moving on to like the OnlyFans account, whether that person is treated with like more respect and more humanity than say someone who doesn't have a safe for work content on like a Pornhub website, or like just any other kind of camming website, where like there's less of a more personal connection between the audience and the person who's performing the sex work.
Yeah, I had never thought of that. I mean, I'm not super familiar with Twitch, just not being a gamer myself, but I really like that thought. That's really interesting to think about, whether that platform could be sort of like this relationship builder, sort of empathy builder, to, you know, help someone's also help their business too in a different sense. That's really cool.
I think it's also, I think this stuff's really interesting, and I think, you know, like similar to what Mike was talking about in terms of like the capitalist sort of element to it, and what these workers are going through. I think it was also really interesting to incorporate the mentions of, you know, the kind of things that they have to endure to make money, like we're putting in 70 hours a week and, you know, not sleeping. And then it seems, I don't know that they specifically mention how much they make based off of like those tips, but I imagine it seems like it's not much. And so I think the inclusion of that, them sort of not even reaping the full benefits of what's going on in that sense and having to really put themselves through all this is also really well done.
Yeah, definitely. And I know, at least in one element of that too, that Issa Mazet was saying that she wanted to highlight was that, like, it was unfortunate that, you know, because the sex work community, at least the cam girl community, there's a lot of support amongst the girls and any of the people who are involved in producing that content. While they're supportive, the framework in which it's built upon is so problematic and so like patriarchal and capitalist too, like Mike is saying, that people are pitted against each other. And so even though like they might support each other, they also, in order to make a living and, you know, make any kind of money, they also have to try to, you know, stay up in the rank. Otherwise their page won't get seen ever. And so then like there is a lot more competition. So I thought that was interesting too, that that's definitely problematic.
They kind of vaguely talk around how much it is, because like they say they take half the tips, but also she buys like a $5,000 couch, and so like maybe she made 20 grand off of a show, but like they never go into the, like that detail that I kind of wanted them to do. I want to know the virtual currency. I want to know the split. That's what I care about.
Yeah, I'd be really curious too. Yeah. But I mean, it's probably difficult. I mean, I guess she would know as someone who's done it like on a particular platform, but I bet you for anyone trying to do research, it would be difficult to find out unless you directly talk to people, because it's definitely not probably in the company's interests to advertise that, for sure. I'll just say one more thing before we go. I hope that there are more films about camming, that there are more films about sex work in all its forms, but most importantly, I hope that there are more films by sex workers, whether, you know, that's from the more minimal end in terms of just having a sex worker as a consultant, to the more ideal where, you know, the stories and the filming and the, you know, performers are by the community members, by sex workers. I feel like it's just important to have more representation out there and more dialogue about the type of representation and the depictions, and having a more diverse array of depictions out there available for people to learn from, empathize with, and or feel represented for sex workers themselves.
There's clearly so much to talk about with this film, and I think that's a credit to it. There's a lot to consider after the fact, and so I do hope that there's more that comes in this sort of vein. But with that, I think we'll wrap up the show. So thank you, Kylie, for bringing up this film for us to consider and think about and talk about, and, you know, recommend to people to watch. And thank you to everyone for listening into the show this week. We hope you enjoyed it, and we hope you enjoyed the conversation. And whether you're a returning listener or if this is your first time with us, we appreciate you tuning into the show. Please subscribe to the show on Anchor, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, YouTube, or wherever you listen to podcasts. And also spread the word. You can follow us on Instagram at Cineposium and on Twitter at Cposium to keep up with updates and to keep in communication with us. If you're interested in subscribing to our weekly e-newsletter, email us at cineposium.ucla@gmail.com. Thank you all again for listening. Until next week, take care, everyone.